The story of Jacob and Esau that we're going to look at today is primarily in Genesis 32 and 33. But this isn't where their story began. Back in the 25th chapter of Genesis, we see the beginning of Jacob and Esau's relationship, which began earlier than most. Twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah, their struggling began in Rebekah's womb. And from before their birth, these two sons were understood as the beginning of two divided nations. Later in life, Esau let go of his birthright, his status and extra rights as the elder son, giving it up to Jacob for a bowl of lentil stew. Life was strained for the brothers thereafter. Things got even worse when Father Isaac was on his deathbed, and Jacob, with Mother Rebekah's help, tricked his father to give Jacob the blessing that was due to Esau. And the author of the Genesis text does not mince words, writing, "Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, 'The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob.'" Rebekah hears of Esau's words and urges Jacob to leave and go to stay with her brother Laban until such time as it becomes safe for Jacob to return. So Jacob does that. And then he finds himself tricked by Laban and ends up spending many years working for Laban in order to eventually marry both Leah and Rachel, and also two maids, all of which bear his children, including 12 sons. And after perhaps 2 decades, Jacob hears God's instruction to return to Canaan, but he is concerned about encountering Esau again, who, last he knew, wanted to kill him. As they begin to travel, Jacob sends messengers ahead of their group to scope out the situation, and they report back that indeed Esau is on his way to meet Jacob, accompanied by 400 men. Jacob is afraid and distressed and strategizes by splitting up his own people, his wives and children, his animals, setting aside some to be gifts for Esau, but ultimately trying to protect against an attack that could kill all of his group, particularly those who are his favorites. As Jacob's group gets close to the point of meeting, they come to the river Jabbok, and there Jacob sends everyone else ahead, including all of his possessions, across the river, and Jacob stays behind. And that's where we pick up in Genesis chapter 32. And I'm going to invite you to read along with the Pew Bible, because I'm using that version, or with the scripture as it appears on the screen, and we're going to do some audience participation. I'm going to invite Jason to come up and read the part of Jacob. I will read the part of the narrator. I'll also give some signals so you know who is speaking what. And I'm going to ask this side of the sanctuary, upper and lower, to read the part of the man. And this side of the sanctuary to read the part designated as Esau. Okay? So Jacob, narrator, the man, Esau. And those joining online may read whatever you wish or both. And we're going to pick up in Genesis at chapter 32, verse 24. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, but Jacob replied,
"I will not let you go unless you bless me."
The man asked him,
"What is your name?"
"Jacob,"
he answered. Then the man said,
"Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and the demons and have overcome."
Jacob said,
"Please tell me your name."
But he replied,
"Why do you ask my name?"
Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying,
"It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared."
The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and children. He asked. Jacob answered,
"They are the children God has graciously given your servant."
Then the female servants and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Esau asked, "What's the meaning of all these flocks and herds on my head?"
"To find favor in your eyes, my lord,"
he said. But Esau said,
"I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself."
"No, please,"
said Jacob.
"if I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you. For God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need."
And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. Then Esau said, But Jacob said to him,
"My Lord knows that the children are tender, and that I must care for the ewes and cows that are nursing their young. If they are driven hard just one day, all the animals will die. So let my Lord go on ahead of his servant, while I move along slowly at the pace of the flocks and herds before me, and the pace of the children, until I come to see my Lord and sire."
Esau said,
"But why do that?
Jacob asked.
Just let me find favor in the eyes of my Lord."
So that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Jacob, however, went to Sukkot, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Sukkot. Thank you, Jacob. And Esau, and the man. Thank you. About a month ago, Jason and Liz and I made a very exciting discovery. By way of background, you need to know that I type a lot, and I actually really enjoy typing. In fact, if you were to ask my opinion of the best, most helpful class that I've ever taken, maybe before college, I would tell you my high school typing class. That was probably 1992 or 1993 or thereabouts, so the class was still on typewriters. And I was probably one of the few in the room that did not have my sights set on an administrative office career. We did what I presume was the normal typing class stuff for that era, typing memos and letters with particular margins and spacing, making sure that things were spelled correctly. But of course, during that semester, we also were increasing our speed at typing. And I went from hunting and pecking to pretty fluent typing. And I actually started noticing that I would be typing with my fingers while I was sitting on the couch watching TV, and I was replaying the word or the sentence that I had just heard. So fast forward to the early 2000s, after I decided that I wanted to stay home while raising our kiddos, and I fell into a niche field of work that involved proofreading and specialized editing for court reporters, called scoping. Without going too far down that rabbit trail, I worked for about 15 years from home as a freelancer for court reporters, proofreading and editing transcripts of depositions and court trials. It was good work, and I can tell you that court work is both very, very interesting and very, very boring. But I did a lot of typing, and I got pretty fast. And I actually have been through more than one laptop keyboard where I have literally typed so much that the letters have worn off the keys. But in all the typing that I've done, I had never paid any attention to, let alone used, one particular key. That one. So we started out the idea for this theme with a slash. But I'm a bit of a punctuation nerd, and I am aware that using a slash indicates or, either or, one or the other, a separation between two things. And that wasn't what we were going for. Another choice might have been to use the hyphen, which is put in between two words to bring them together and combine or insinuate the idea of and. And that was closer to what we were going for during this month's series, but also not quite exactly it. Well, the very exciting discovery that we pastors made was that there is this other symbol on the keyboard, one that I had never heard of before. It's called the pipe symbol, really creatively because it looks like a pipe, I think. And it's essentially just a vertical line. And it's on the same key as the backslash on a keyboard. Now, this symbol is not generally used in standard writing, which is probably why I had really never noticed it before, but it is used in math and software coding. And I am no coding expert, and I have a son up there who is a math minor, and so I share this with humility and from a space of non-expertise. But my understanding is that one use of the pipe symbol in coding is to redirect the first command's output as an input into the second command. The result of the first thing is needed to go into the second thing in order for the whole thing to work. So it creates a necessary interconnectedness of sorts, a relationship between what's on one side of the symbol and what's on the other side. And that seemed like it might be a pretty important idea. We live in a world that is full of us and them, often framed as us versus them. We see it everywhere. I apologize, I am not an American football fan, so the frenetic ferocity of fandom is beyond me. I actually had to Google World Series 2023 to find out if it had happened yet. I'm sorry. And I do enjoy watching sports. I really enjoy watching college basketball, but I don't have any particular attachment to a team, and I really just appreciate the game. But take me to a soccer game where my kiddo is standing in goal, as is actually happening at this very minute in East Petersburg, and I am often shocked when I sit back and reflect on how I begin to feel about the other players and the other fans, particularly when they do certain things. And we feel it when we hear it on the news. We're scrolling social media, or we find ourselves in a conversation at the grocery store, or the dentist, if you can converse at the dentist, or the hairdresser, the barber, and we realize that we are with people who are clearly standing in a different place than we are. This week in particular, as Election Day approaches on Tuesday, we are again confronted with the partisan reality of American society, whether we are talking nationally, state, or our local community school board. Some of this us versus them is generated by our individual need for identity, who we are, clarifying our self-concept, and then affiliating with a particular group that affirms and supports that identity. Some of this us versus them is generated by the human emotions that cause us to feel strongly about particular ideas. And when we come face to face with others who don't value the same things or don't understand why we do, we feel that deeply and quickly. Some of this us versus them is created when we focus on the things that create difference, often devaluing what is different about them. But I think God is calling us to something else, something that continues to feel new and novel, at least for me, even after a couple thousand years of wrestling with the biblical text. Instead of us versus them, I suggest that the spirit of life and love seems to be hinting that it is more appropriate to consider how we might live in a new way. Us for them, us with them. I have heard the story of Jacob and Esau used as an illustration in conflict resolution contexts, and I think there is a lot of richness in these chapters of Genesis. There's a positive change in the relationship between Jacob and Esau. And while we aren't given all the details, it seems clear that unexpected things can happen as time and space massage pain and anger in a relationship. Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck, says the NRSV, and kissed him, and they wept. I can only imagine the surprise and relief from both parties at this outcome. But the previous scene is essential. We don't know what Esau was doing before he and his 400 men were on their way, the day before, the week before, the year before. But the text does tell us what Jacob was doing, wrestling with the man and finding favor in God's eyes. I wish I had a better grasp of Hebrew because there is a lot that is lost in the translation to English. In Genesis 32:20, a verse that we did not read this morning, but right before Jacob sends his family and belongings across the river, right before he begins to wrestle in the dark with this unnamed man, as Jacob is planning how he will approach and attempt to reconcile with his brother Esau, with whom he has experienced long-term separation and fear for his life, we read, "For he, Jacob, thought, I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me." In the Hebrew, that verse, Jacob's thought about how to reconcile with Esau, is a fourfold play on the word face. He hoped to appease or pacify Esau, which is the Hebrew idiom, cover his face, by sending a gift ahead of him, which is the Hebrew idiom, walking to my face. And then so that Jacob could then face Esau, literally seeing his face, so that perhaps Esau might forgive Jacob, which is the Hebrew idiom, lift my face. It is only after wrestling with the angel of God, coming face to face with his understanding of the Creator and holy presence and his understanding of himself in relationship to that Holy One, that Jacob is then able to face Esau. I have been reminded over and over again through the years as I have studied discernment and spiritual development and leadership and reconciliation, that those things, those processes, need to begin with ourselves before we go out further. What personal work, what spiritual wrestling do we need to do within ourselves, face to face with the unnamed, faceless presence we claim to follow? This past week, I was honored to meet and spend time with Donna Hicks, author of the book Dignity. I'll go there in a second. I brought the book. Its essential role in resolving conflict. And she was on campus as the Elizabethtown College Peace Fellow. And I was again reminded of this movement from self outward. Donna has researched and written on the idea of dignity as essential for human relationship. She defines dignity as an internal state of peace that comes with the recognition and acceptance of the value and vulnerability of all living things. This does not mean that the things that another does or says necessarily are to be recognized and honored and respected and determined to have value, but the other's essential human dignity does deserve our attention. And she identifies 10 essential elements of dignity, which I'd like to briefly share with you. As you hear these, and this is what I did with my students when I shared these in class this past week as well, and so I personally find this valuable. There's 10. I'll describe them briefly, and I want you to think about which ones come easier to you and which ones are more challenging when you look at others. So the 10 essential elements of dignity. Acceptance of identity. Approach people as being neither inferior nor superior to you. Give others the freedom to express their authentic selves without fear of being negatively judged. Interact without prejudice or bias, accepting the ways in which race, religion, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, class, age, and disability may be at the core of other people's identities. Assume that others have integrity. Inclusion. Make others feel that they belong, whatever the relationship, whether they are in your family, community, organization, or nation. Safety. Put people at ease at 2 levels, physically, so they feel safe from bodily harm, and psychologically, so they feel safe from being humiliated. Help them to feel free to speak without fear of retribution. Acknowledgement. Give people your full attention by listening, hearing, validating, and responding to their concerns, feelings, and experiences. Recognition. Validate others for their talents, hard work, thoughtfulness, and help. Be generous with praise, and show appreciation and gratitude to others for their contributions and ideas. Fairness. Treat people justly, with equality, and in an even-handed way according to agreed-on laws and rules. People feel that you have honored their dignity when you treat them without discrimination or injustice. Benefit of the doubt. Treat people as trustworthy. Start with the premise that others have good motives and are acting with integrity. Understanding. Believe that what others think matters. Give them the chance to explain and express their points of view. Actively listen in order to understand them. Independence. Encourage people to act on their own behalf so that they feel in control of their lives and experience a sense of hope and possibility. Accountability. Take responsibility for your actions. If you have violated the dignity of another person, apologize. Make a commitment to change your hurtful behaviors. This is not easy. It's a bit of a 2-step dance. First, seeing the dignity and honor in one's self, wrestling with our own worth, recognizing our own value, being vulnerable with ourselves, acknowledging that God sees us as whole and holy. Some of us struggle with that more intensely than others. Loving ourselves, working through shame or guilt or festering anger or distrust. It may feel disconnected sitting in this room this morning, but there may be situations or relationships that trigger us, and we walk away thinking, who was I in that moment, and who am I now? And then the next step is using that internal work to be able to truly recognize the value and worth in others, even when we disagree on what we believe to be some of the most essential things about life, or when they say nasty things or cause harm. Acknowledging dignity does not mean we must agree or condone poor choices or support ideas we find appalling, but it does mean that we recognize and honor the dignity of the other. I don't know whether Jacob had difficulty with his own sense of self-worth and his own dignity, but it seems as though he needed to prepare before he could re-enter space with his brother, facing God before facing Esau. What does your wrestling look like? What posture will you take in order to be in the best position to see the face of God, both at work in your own wrestling and the face of God in the other, the opponent, the them? By the time we see each other again next Sunday morning, an election day will have come and gone. We don't know what will happen on Tuesday. There are probably some things we each would like to see happen, some candidates we would each prefer to be elected to various positions. That may or may not happen. But Wednesday morning, we will still get out of bed and begin our day, and we will need to find ways to face each other, face those who voted for candidates that we think are the wrong choice for a myriad of reasons, face each other as human beings, recognizing that every other one has innate worth and was created in the image of God. Face each other in the way that Christ has called us, with love and grace and mercy, even when it hurts. Sometimes our wrestling keeps us up all night. Sometimes our struggles are resolved with a loving embrace and a surprising welcome and tears. And sometimes, as was ultimately the case at the end of the Jacob and Esau story, we go our separate ways, resting in the knowledge that we have recognized one another's dignity, but we are aware that the relationship will continue in a different form. Us for them, us with them, doesn't necessarily mean that we become best friends and live happily ever after. But it does mean that we look upon the face of those with love and peace, the same love and peace that we have found in Christ, which enables us to come face to face with the very dignity that we seek in and for ourselves. May it be so.